When the evidence came in strong and heavy that there was a beginning to space-time, it was resisted in the UK. It had been believed with Aristotle that the universe was eternal. But the Hebrew Bible had, for centuries, and the Christian New Testament had been claiming that there was a beginning.
Yep.
And they were proved to be right.
John Lennox explains how the Big Bang in cosmology points to a creator. And it's absolutely fascinating. Shout out to Justin Brearley, because John Lennox was on his podcast, and it is gonna blow you away.
You've spoken about the intelligibility of the universe, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, and the way that it is very coherent when it comes to a theistic outlook on the world. What about the actual results of science? Because obviously what a lot of people are interested in are some of the things like Big Bang cosmology, this idea that there was a beginning, physical beginning to the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe where the parameters and numbers of the physics themselves and the laws seem so exquisitely finely tuned to allow life to develop in the cosmos. To what extent do you think Christians can use those kinds of physical discoveries to build a case for a mind behind the universe?
To a very great extent, because our atheist friends see there is a problem. Take the Big Bang first. Of course, Fred Hoyle coined that phrase, Big Bang. It was a label and a mystery. It was his rejection, really, and repugnance to the idea of a beginning. And part of that, his colleagues said, was he didn't really like the idea of a creator. Now, what is so interesting about that is that I remember the 1960s when the evidence came in strong and heavy that there was a beginning to space-time. It was resisted in the UK, even by the editor of Nature, who said we shouldn't go down that road because it'll give too much leverage to people who believe in creation. In other words, it raised the obvious question: if there was a beginning to space-time, and everything we know this universe proceeded from that point, it raises the question, what caused it? What lies behind?
And I don't know why, but growing up, I was always taught like the Big Bang was against God and it was proof for evolution. I don't know why. I don't have no idea why at all. So I was thinking, like, if the Big Bang points to there being a beginning, an origin, that means that the universe hasn't always existed for infinity. So therefore, the Big Bang points to a creator because something put everything into motion, nothing put nothing into motion. That's also a great reason. So that's why I'm so confused. Why in the world were so many people against, like, the creationists? I remember Kent Hovind would be like, evolutionists, atheists believe that in the beginning there was a Big Bang, and then he kind of made fun of it. And then he's like, the creationists, we believe in the beginning God. But like, what if God created like something, you know, something. Why couldn't that be both?
Now, oddly enough, it was the 1960s where we had the definitive evidence came in. For centuries, it had been believed with Aristotle that the universe was eternal. But the Hebrew Bible had, for centuries, and the Christian New Testament had been claiming that there was a beginning.
Yep.
And they were proved to be right. And when I mentioned this in a debate with Dawkins, he said, what's the big deal? There either was a beginning and there wasn't. So if you guess, you've got a 50% chance of getting it right. I said, Richard, it wasn't decided by statistics or tossing a coin. It was decided against enormous pressure. And a lot of the pressure coming from atheism, that it couldn't be so. So to be able to say initially, as you say, the pushback against the idea that there was a beginning to space-time actually did come primarily from atheist scientists.
That's fascinating.
And they had to give in because of the sheer weight of evidence. So Dawkins was wrong when he suggested to me that it was the toss of a coin. And I have made the point repeatedly, at least the Bible got it right all those millennia ago. And so we have a beginning. It raises the question of, well, what caused that? The cosmologists, brilliant people like the late Stephen Hawking, come in to try to explain how you can get something from nothing. This is the key philosophical question.
Great
Goes back
thought.
to Leibniz and Heidegger and all kinds of other people. How do you get something for nothing? And his key statement in his penultimate book is, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Now, when I read that, I thought, pardon? Because there is a law like gravity, because there's something, the universe will create itself from nothing. That's a flat logical contradiction. But then, on inquiring a bit further, I noticed, well, because there's a law like gravity, is this falling for the common mistake among scientists that laws create things? C.S. Lewis debunked that long ago when pointing out that the laws of arithmetic won't create any money for you, even though some experts in the banking world thought it could. And then finally, the universe will create itself. Well, what does that mean? Just analyzing the words. If I say X creates Y, it means if you've got X, you're going to get Y, roughly speaking. If I say X creates X, well, as I said in my book, it means nonsense remains nonsense, even if high-powered scientists talk it. Now, that profoundly disturbed me. If this is the way you get rid of God, then it is intellectually unworthy. And think of Lawrence Krauss in his book, A Universe from Nothing, where he says near the beginning, he says, surely nothing must be physical, just as something is, even if it is the absence of something. Well, that's just sheer rubbish.
Yeah.
Now, if people to get rid of God have to resort to rubbish, then using inference, the best explanation, the God explanation comes off very much more actively. It really does.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. I feel like people will just come up with anything to not admit that the best evidence is for God. For them to say, well, if something is physical, nothing must be physical too. Well, just saying some complete idiotic statement doesn't make it true.
Worry be that kind of non-explanation that is being foisted on people today. So there's a huge question. Hawking has not solved the question of why there's something rather than nothing. And what I want to say very carefully is, the universe came from nothing physical, but it didn't come from nothing. It came from God, who's not nothing. God may be spirit, but he isn't nothing. And therefore, again, the biblical worldview comes in with an explanation that makes sense. Now, I've mentioned once or twice in the course of this chat, inference to the best explanation. You see, science has got several ways of explaining things, and one of them is inductive explanation. That is where you do a lot of experiments, you can repeat them, and you come to a conclusion, and you expect to happen tomorrow what happened yesterday, and so on. But there's lots of fascinating things in the universe that are not repeated, like the origin of the universe, or the origin of life. And there you have to use inference to the best explanation. In other words, the methods of the historian or forensic scientist. Hercule Poirot cannot say, well, let's see what happened. Let's repeat the murder and we can see exactly what happened. You can't do that. So he has to use inference.
Yeah.
Now, if A did the murder, you'd expect X to happen. X happened. But then Y has happened, and that excludes A. But if B did the murder, both X and Y would happen. So that B is a more plausible candidate. And so you make an inference to the best explanation. And that's the secret of Agatha Christie's denouements.
And that's the sort of explanation that you might then be tempted to give for a phenomenon like the fine-tuning of the universe for life. So
absolutely.
These extraordinary physical constants and laws that seem so precisely balanced in a way that allows life to develop in the cosmos.
Yeah, before John Lennox explains, just the fact that we're not burning up right now because we're too close to the sun, just the fact that we're not freezing to death, just the fact like at the perfect law so that we don't explode or get sucked into a black hole. Like, all of these things go hand in hand. It's just astonishing to me to think that people don't believe in a God.
Well, firstly, of these types of laws, and then why you think it's valid to use an explanation such as a designer.
Well, Paul Davies, a physicist who I know and is always worth reading, has got a whole array of these. And one of them is, if you consider the ratio of the electromagnetic force constant to the gravitational force constant, if you decrease that just by the slightest 1 part in 10 to the power 40, that's a 1 with 40 zeros at it, then you will only get large stars. If you increase it by 1 part in 10 to the 40, you'll only get little stars. But in order to have carbon-based life, you must have both big stars and little stars. So the fine-tuning has to be unbelievably precise. And there are even more significant examples given by Roger Penrose, who one of his fine-tuning arguments is that if you want to have a universe with a second law of dynamics, in other words, one in which a car will rust eventually, disorder increases, the creator's aim, and he uses that word, he doesn't believe in a creator, must be accurate to 1 part in 10 to the power 10 to the power 123, which number, as he points out, is so big that if you put a 1 here and a 0 in every elementary particle in the universe, you can't even write it out in decimal basis. So this is a huge thing. It demands explanation. There's a very eminent philosopher here in Oxford. He invited me to be grilled by his students and talk to them about why I believed in God. And he said, I hope you're going to use the best argument against atheism. I said, well, I'll use it if you tell me what it is. Oh, he said, if ever I were to become a Christian, it would be the fine-tuning argument. He said, that really does have bite. And so it's not that I'm sitting here as a Christian saying, look, you guys ought to think about this. They are thinking about it. It's part of standard science now. This is not some peripheral little thing. It is hardcore mainstream science. And it...
Yeah, I don't mean to stop, but for people, let's be honest though, I think that a lot of atheists are closer to God than a majority of people who aren't even thinking about this, because they're asking the tough questions. They obviously contemplated the idea of God. For whatever reason, they came to this conclusion because of circumstances or whatever thought they think is rational. But I will give them that. They're thinking, they're processing, and we just got to pray for them.
This is a huge question. Now, I'm well aware that the way out of it for many scientists, like our astronomer royal, Lord Rees, is to say that there is a multiverse. There are infinitely many universes, and so you'd expect, if that's the case, there to be one like this. But there's no evidence for these universes. And I may be prejudiced, but I was taught quantum physics years ago at Cambridge by Sir John Polkinghorne. And he just says these are not accessible to us. And he feels, even on the basis of the principle of economy and explanation, that one universe that has been designed and created by an intelligent creator is infinitely to be preferred to an infinite collection of universes to which we've no access. But I would add that philosophers have been quick to point out that it's not either fine-tuning shows there's a God or there's a multiverse. God can create as many multiverses as he likes, so the multiverse hypothesis does not get rid of God.
The natural response may be, yes, John, that's all very well, but God is a sort of science stopper as an explanation. I can't investigate God, therefore, you know, I don't want that to be the final explanation. And in any case, the more we do learn about the fine-tuning of the universe, it's likely that we will eventually find some naturalistic explanation. And it's just another God of the gaps argument. God will eventually get squeezed out of this particular argument. I mean, what's your response to that idea that it's just more God of the gaps thinking?
Well, the point is that by discovering the fine-tuning, we are investigating God.
Right.
We're investigating the biblical statement, the heavens declare the glory of God. And I made the point earlier, God is the God of the whole show. Henry Ford isn't going to be found in researching the inner workings of a car engine, but you cannot explain its existence without him. What we're dealing with is a complementary approach. We're asking a bigger question. The science gives us the how and part of the why of function. It doesn't give us the ultimate purpose or the ultimate origin. And what these things are doing, like fine-tuning, they're pointing towards something. They're pointing beyond themselves. And what I want to ask is it a reasonable inference to a best explanation to postulate a God who's ultimately responsible for the complexity of this nature, or to postulate mindless, impersonal forces? And when I see the atheistic explanation runs into the sand at the very first hurdle, that is explaining our trust in human intelligence to sort the thing out, then, of course, I feel that it's much better to go for an explanation that makes sense than one that makes no sense whatsoever.
Having talked about fine-tuning at the cosmological level, you also say there's a case for fine-tuning at the biological level. This perhaps is a more controversial claim because, in a sense, it's almost been regarded as sacrosanct, the idea that Darwin showed us, categorically that there's no need anymore to think of design in biology, that evolution, the principle of mutation and selection, provide all we need to show the way that the diversity and apparent complexity and designed aspect of life wasn't in fact designed.
Yeah, it just causes my mind to be so boggled when people say, if you believe in God, you can't do science. You can't learn anymore. It's going to stop you from trying to understand how the world works. How and why? I think every time we understand something more and more, it points to a creator. It points to the mighty handiwork of God.
Richard Dawkins has written many books essentially making this same point over and over. Why do you think the issue of design in biology isn't actually over?
Oh, it's not over for many, many reasons. But to come to the actual business of fine-tuning, there are two Norwegians, I think it's Steinar Thorvaldsen and Ola Høsjer, brilliant statisticians who have been working in the biological field. And they've just recently written a paper pointing out that there is strong evidence of fine-tuning in the organic world. Now, they say this is very early stages and there'd be a lot to be done. And I think Alistair McGrath has been making hints in this direction. And Marcus Eberlin, a brilliant Brazilian biologist, has written a book called Foresight. And he looks at the sheer complexity and the nature of that complexity of biological mechanisms and says they exhibit a characteristic of mind that is not possessed by natural processes, and that is foresight. Wow. And this is a very interesting development. So I see this as a field that will burgeon out as we see, and we see the following, that Richard Dawkins' assessment of how life came to be and how it developed is increasingly turning out to be seen as very naive, if not completely false.
Wow.
Now, let me say something about that. I have here, because I don't want to misquote it, the famous statement in The Blind Watchmaker, where he says, natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process which Darwin discovered and which we now know, is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind, it has no mind and no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future, it has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of watchmaker in nature, it is that of the blind watchmaker. Now, that's marvelous writing. The rhetoric is terrific, but it's nonsense. Because if you analyze it, the first thing you notice is that it's not a sleight of hand, it's a sleight of rhetoric. You see, blind automatic process. That makes you think it hasn't been designed. But wait a minute. I have a self-winding watch. It's blind, it's automatic, so it hasn't been designed. No, it has been designed. In other words, where Dawkins is saying this mechanism has no mind, what he is dodging is the question everybody wants to ask, but is there a mind behind it? That's a totally different question. And he hasn't even dealt with that question.
Wow.
So
Absolutely amazing. Shout out to John Lennox. Psalms 19:1. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Guys, God's handiwork is all over. The design argument is so good. So guys, I encourage you all to go to Jesus. Know that he loves you so much. He's longing to have a relationship with you. We could trust in the Bible. We could trust in what it says. Anyway, guys, love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day.